This video is going to review parallel and perpendicular lines. So to begin with, let's talk about the definitions for parallel and perpendicular lines and some possible examples. So parallel lines are lines that never cross, and they're going to have the same slope, which we call M. So anytime that you're looking for parallel or perpendicular lines, you're going to be looking specifically at the slope, which is the M. So in our first example for parallel and perpendicular, or parallel lines, you've got y equals 3x plus 72 and y equals 3x minus 21. So we're looking for the m value in both of these equations, and we're going to compare them and see that if they're the same. So remember that whenever you write equations of lines, they should be written as y equals mx plus b unless they're in standard form. If they're in standard form, you would need to change them into y equals mx plus b so that you can easily see what the m value is. So in y equals 3x plus 72, the m value is what's always in front of x, so that would be 3. For y equals 3x minus 21, the m value is always in front of x, so again it's 3. Because both of these had an m value that was 3, that makes the two lines parallel. Perpendicular lines are going to cross specifically at a 90-degree angle. They're going to have opposite reciprocal slopes. So when we look at the m's, we'll see that they have different signs and they're reciprocals of each other. So an example of that would be like if you had negative 1/3, the opposite reciprocal for that would be positive 3/1, which is just 3. So opposite means that they have different signs. Reciprocal means that they're flipped fractions. So when we look at y equals negative 2x plus 6, we see that m is equal to negative 2. When we look at y equals 1/2 x plus 12, we see that m is equal to 1/2. So when we look at our two m's, we want to see that they're different signs, which they are, and we want to see that they're flipped fractions of each other. Now negative 2, we typically don't write like this, but we could rewrite negative 2 to be negative 2/1, and it doesn't change anything about the value that we have, but it does rewrite it so that it's a fraction, which makes it easy for us to see if negative 2 and 1/2 are reciprocals. So reciprocals mean they have to be flipped fractions. So if I'm ignoring the sign and just looking at 2/1, and I flip that, I would get 1/2. So because when I flip 2/1 and get 1/2, that makes them reciprocals. Because they have different signs, that makes them the opposite part. Because they are opposite and reciprocals, that makes them perpendicular. So example 1 says, are the following equations parallel, perpendicular, or neither? So to begin, we're going to look for the m for both equations, and then we're going to compare those numbers. So parallel means they're the same, perpendicular means they're opposite reciprocals, and neither means that it doesn't appear like they have either one of those relationships. So with y equals 5x minus 9, m would be equal to 5. For y equals 10x plus 9, m would be equal to 10. So because those are not the same and they're not opposite reciprocals, this is an example of neither. For b, we've got y equals 3/2x plus 12, so the m would be equal to 3/2. And for y, we've got, or for the second equation, we've got y equals 2/3 x minus 15, so the m would be equal to 2/3. So we can see that they are flipped fractions of each other. However, they don't have different signs. Because they have the same sign, even though they're opposite reciprocals, even though they're reciprocals, they're not opposite reciprocals, which makes them neither parallel nor perpendicular. So for C, we've got y equals negative 7x minus 42, and y equals negative 7x plus 52. So for negative 7x minus 42, m would be equal to negative 7, and for negative 7x plus 52, m would be equal to negative 7. Because the m's match, that makes them parallel. B says 2x plus 4y equals 8, and 6x plus 12 equals 18. So for this particular example, neither one of our equations are written in slope-intercept form, which makes it difficult for me to see what the slope is. So the first thing I should do is try to get them to y equals mx plus b. So if I was going to solve this to try to get it to y equals mx plus b, my goal is to try to figure out what y is equal to, which means I'm going to get rid of anything on this left side that's not y. So to start with, this 2x has nothing to do with y whatsoever other than just being on the same side. So I'm going to get rid of this 2x by moving it to the other side. So you may circle and jump it to the other side and change it from a positive to a negative when it jumps over, or you may subtract 2x on either side, and whichever way you do is fine. So if you do that on the left side, the 2x and negative 2x would cancel, and that would give you 4y equals. And over here, we would have 8 minus 2x. Because 8 and negative 2x do not have the same variables with the same exponents, they're not like terms, which means I can't combine them. So I would have 8 minus 2x on the right side. All right. Now I'm trying to get y by itself. So now I've got to get rid of that 4 that's out front. Well, the 4 and the y are side by side, which means that they're being multiplied. So to get rid of multiplication, I do the opposite, which is division. So I'm going to divide everything by 4. And when I divide everything by 4, those 4's will cancel, which will give me y. I'll have 8 divided by 4, which will give me 2. And negative 2x divided by 4, which would reduce to negative 1/2 x. So you're basically going to say, what can I divide 2 and 4 both by? So I can divide them both by 2. 2 divided by 2 gives me 1, and 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. So now I need to get the m for y equals 2 minus 1/2 x. So remember that your m is the number that's in front of x, so it's the coefficient of x wherever x is located. So for this particular equation, our m would be equal to negative 1/2. All right, I have to do the same thing for the second equation, 6x plus 12y equals 18. So I'm going to take this 6x to the other side, so I can either circle and jump it or subtract it. So that cancels. You're going to have 12y equals 18, and negative 6x are not like terms, which means I can't combine them, so they just kind of go separately. And now I'm going to divide everything by 12. So when I divide everything by 12 to get y by itself, the 12's cancel, which gives me y equals 18 divided by 12. I could reduce both of those numbers by 2. So I could actually divide them both by 6. So let's go with 6. Even though I can do 2, I would have to reduce it again. But I can do 6 and I wouldn't have to reduce it but just one time. So I would say 18 divided by 6 gives me 3. And 12 divided by 6 gives me 2. So 3 over 2. Then over here I've got negative 6x divided by 12. I can reduce 6 over 12 to 1/2. So it would be minus 1/2 x. So then I have to see what my m would be equal to. And in this case it would be equal to negative 1/2. So then I compare my m's. And because they are exactly the same, that makes them parallel. Example 2 says write an equation that is parallel to y equals 16x plus 4 and passes through the point 0, 0. So because it asked me to write an equation, in the end I'm going to end up with something that looks like y equals mx plus b. Which means that I have to get 2 important pieces of information to be able to write this equation. Remember the x and the y are always going to stay in the equation, but the m and the b are going to change depending on what your line looks like. So I have to figure out what m and b are in order to be able to write my equation. So I can easily figure out what m is going to be because it tells me it has to be parallel to y equals 16x plus 4. So if it's parallel to y equals 16x plus 4, that means it's going to have the same slope. So this slope is 16, which means that my new slope is also going to be 16. However, it does not tell me what the b has to be, but it tells me it passes through the point 0, 0. So anytime that I need to figure out what the b is, I'm always going to do the b box. So remember, the b box has all of the parts of slope-intercept form. So it'll have m equals, b equals, x equals, y equals, and then in the end, you should be able to write your new equation. So I'm going to have to figure out what the b is equal to, so I can skip that part for right now. And I can fill in my x and y because it gives me a point. And I know that anytime it gives me a point, it always gives me an x value and a y value, with x being the first number in my point and y being the second number. So in this case, it's going to be 0 and 0. So once I get to this point and I need to figure out what b is, I'm going to use y equals mx plus b to do that. So I'm going to plug in all of these numbers where they go in y equals mx plus b, and that will help me to figure out what b would be equal to. So I go back to here and I say in place of y, I'm going to put 0. So 0 equals, in place of m, 16, in place of x, 0, plus b. So I would have 0 equals 16 times 0 is 0 plus b. Well, 0 plus b just means b. So b is 0. Once you figure out what b is, you can mark out x and y and write your new equation using your m and your b in your b box. So your new equation would be y equals 16x plus 0. But I don't technically have to write that 0, so you could also have y equals 16x. On your EOC, they're more likely to write it this way, just because this is kind of jumbled up and we don't typically add in the 0. Example 3 says write an equation that is perpendicular to y equals negative 1/4 x plus 2 and passes through the point 1, 3. So because it asked me to write an equation, the first thing that you need to do is write down y equals mx plus b. And that kind of gives you a hint of what you need to do. So remember that if you have to write an equation, there are two important pieces of information that you have to write that equation. You've got to have m and you've got to have b. You can easily figure out what m is based on what the problem is asking you to do. So it asks you to be perpendicular to y equals negative 1/4 x. So if you think about your original m would be negative 1/4. So if your original m is negative 1/4, your new m, because it needs to be perpendicular, is going to be the opposite reciprocal of negative 1/4. So if it's negative, your new m is going to be positive, and you're going to flip your fraction. So 1/4 is going to become 4/1, which is just 4. So now you've got your new m to be 4. Now we don't know what b is, so we're going to do our b box. So we're going to include everything that's in y equals mx plus b. So we'll have m, b, and then x and y. And in the end, you'll be able to write your new equation. So we can't figure out what b is. That's why we did the b box. But we do know that this equation has to pass through the point 1, 3. So 1 is our x and 3 is our y. So we plug in 1 and 3. And once we get to this point, we need to figure out what b is. So we're going to plug in our numbers where they go in y equals mx plus b. So y was 3, m was 4, x was 1, and then plus b. So you would have 3 equals 4 times 1, which is 4, plus b. But your goal is to try to figure out what b is. So you need to get rid of this 4. So you can either circle and jump into the other side, and because it's a positive, it would become a negative on the other side. Or you can subtract 4 from both sides. So if we subtract 4 from both sides, you would get 3 minus 4, which is negative 1. So negative 1 equals B. You can mark out x and y once you get your B, because then you have everything that you need to write your new equation. So your new equation is going to look like y equals 4x minus 1.